Imagine losing everything, your land, your money, your pride, until the only thing you own is a single wrinkled dollar bill. Now imagine spending that last dollar not on food, not on shelter, but on a human life. A young Apache girl being sold like cattle under the blistering Arizona sun. This is not just a tale of desperation. It's a story of redemption, of freedom, and of two souls colliding in a world where chains weighed heavier than bullets. If you want to know how one man's final gamble became the start of a revolution, and why sometimes the poorest choice leads to the richest truth, stay with me. And before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because stories like this, stories that challenge the way we see survival, loyalty, and freedom, are the ones you don't want to miss. The year was 1875, and the frontier was a graveyard of broken men, where dreams died faster than crops under the Arizona sun. And Jonathan Hale was one of those men wandering through the ashes of his own life. Once he had been a rancher in Kentucky, heir to a proud line of horse breeders. But the Civil War had stripped him of land, family, and faith, leaving him drifting westward in search of a fortune that never came. And by the time he stumbled into the border town of San Miguel, he had nothing left but a single greenback dollar creased thin from too many desperate fingers, a coin clinking like a cruel joke in his pocket, and a hunger in his gut that would not quit. Yet on that morning, the town square roared, not with commerce of cattle or crops, but with a darker trade. For a crude wooden platform had been erected, and on it stood 3 Apache captives, 2 half-dead men beaten to near collapse, and 1 girl, no more than 16, her wrists bound, her body gaunt, but her eyes, those fierce black eyes, burning with the unbroken fire of her people. And as the auctioneer in his greasy hat shouted, "Savage stock for sale, strong arms for labor, strong backs for breaking," the drunken crowd jeered and tossed bids like scraps to vultures. And Jonathan felt sickness rise in his throat as he remembered the war, where lives were bought with bullets and freedom was bartered away in the mud. Yet still he told himself to walk on, that he had nothing left to give, until the girl's gaze found him, and in that instant something pierced through the shell of his ruin. Not pity, not desire, but a fierce, unspoken challenge. What would you do, Jonathan Hale, if you had one last chance to be more than the failure you've become? And when the bidding for the 2 men ended and no one wanted the girl, the auctioneer sneered, $1. Just a single dollar takes her. And the square fell silent except for the wind. And Jonathan, almost against his will, reached into his pocket, felt the paper thin and frail like his own soul, and raised it high, his voice cracking as he said, $1. And the crowd howled with laughter at the madness of buying what no man wanted. But the auctioneer slammed his fist and spat, "Sold!" And so, with the last thread of his survival, Jonathan Hale became the owner of an Apache girl, who stared at him with neither gratitude nor fear, but with fire enough to burn empires. And in that moment, neither of them yet understood that a ragged bill worth almost nothing would ignite a journey worth more than kingdoms. Jonathan Hale did not know what to say as he led the girl away. From the jeering crowd, their laughter still clinging to his back like flies on carrion. And though he had given his last dollar to free her from the block, he realized quickly that freedom was a word too fragile for a world built on chains. For the girl did not walk behind him meekly, nor beside him like an equal, but with her chin raised, her eyes searing into the horizon as though she were already plotting escape or vengeance. And Jonathan, weary and hollow as he was, felt both fear and awe stirring within him. They left the square, past the saloon where men drank away fortunes, and the chapel where women prayed for husbands who would never return, until they reached the edge of town where Jonathan's horse, a bony roan barely alive, waited tethered in the dust. And there he cut the rope that bound her wrists, not out of kindness, but because he knew a rope would not hold a spirit like hers. And when the cords fell, she rubbed her raw skin and spat in the dirt near his boots, her first gesture of defiance, a gesture that told him she was no one's property, not even the fool who had bought her. And Jonathan muttered, "You're free now," though the words felt brittle, And she answered not with thanks, but with silence so sharp it stung. They traveled together out of San Miguel, with the sun bleeding over the desert. Jonathan with nothing but the clothes on his back and a pistol with 2 bullets. The girl barefoot and thin, yet walking with the strength of stone. And as the night fell cold and coyotes cried in the distance, he built a small fire, offered her the last crust of bread he carried, and she took it without a word, her eyes never leaving his, as if measuring the weight of his soul. When at last he asked her name, she spoke, voice rough with dust but strong, "Naeli," and the sound of it carved into his memory like a blade, and though he did not know its meaning, it struck him as something sacred, something unbroken. Yet trust was not born in that desert, for in the dark Jonathan woke to the sound of movement and found Nayeli with his pistol in hand, pointing it at his chest, her hands steady, her eyes colder than the stars. And for a long moment he thought she would pull the trigger and end him where he lay. But then, as though some invisible judgment had passed, she tossed the weapon back into the dirt and lay down again, leaving him shaking with the knowledge that he had not bought a servant, nor even a companion, but a storm bound to no man. And as the fire cracked low, he whispered to the emptiness, "God help me," because he sensed that this girl, this Apache soul forged in the cruelty of conquest, would either save him from the ruin he carried or destroy him completely. The days that followed stretched across the desert like endless wounds, Jonathan and Nayeli moving together yet apart, bound not by trust but by necessity. For the desert was merciless, and even the strongest spirit could not cross it alone. And though she walked with the silence of a shadow, her presence pressed on him like a weight, reminding him with every glance that she was no prize to be kept, but a fire that could not be caged. And soon the desert delivered its cruelty in the form of riders. 6 men with rifles slung low and eyes hungry for blood. Men Jonathan knew by their colors, scouts and mercenaries, who made their coin by selling captives and bodies to the highest bidder. And when they circled the fire one night, sneering at Nayeli like wolves eyeing a lamb, Jonathan felt the sickness of cowardice creeping into his chest. For he was outnumbered, outgunned, and the pistol at his side held only 2 bullets, one for mercy and one for pride. But before he could speak, Nayeli rose to her feet, shoulders squared, and in her tongue hurled words at them that Jonathan could not understand, though the defiance in her voice needed no translation, and the leader, a scarred brute with a gold tooth, laughed and spat. "She's got spirit, but spirit breaks." And as he reached for her, Jonathan's hand moved without thought, pistol raised, shot cracking through the desert air, the first bullet tearing the gold-toothed man from his saddle, and chaos erupted, horses screaming, rifles firing, flames scattering sparks across the night. And in the madness, Nayeli moved like a hawk loosed from a cage, seizing a fallen rifle, firing with a skill that turned the air to thunder, and together they fought with a desperation that was more survival than victory, until the dust cleared and the bodies of men lay broken in the sand, silence settling heavy as a grave. Jonathan stood shaking, pistol empty, breath ragged, while Nayeli knelt by the leader's corpse, pried free a blood-stained knife, and held it as if reclaiming something stolen, then looked at Jonathan with an expression he could not name, something between respect and judgment, as though she saw for the first time not just a broken rancher, but a man who could still choose to fight. And yet, in that same moment, betrayal cut deeper than the knife in her hand. For when dawn came, Jonathan awoke to find her gone, his horse taken, supplies stripped, rifle missing, only the empty desert around him. And though rage surged through his veins, it was drowned by something sharper, an ache he had not felt in years, the ache of being abandoned by the one soul who had begun to matter. And as he staggered to his feet, sun burning his skin, he whispered her name, Nayeli, not as a curse, but as a vow, for he knew that he would follow, even if it killed him, because freedom had a face now, and it was hers. Jonathan staggered across the desert like a man chasing a ghost. His lips cracked, his body broken, but the fire of her name kept him alive, and after days of hunger and dust, he found tracks leading north into the canyon country, where the land rose in red walls and shadows deep as graves. And there, hidden among the rocks, he stumbled upon the truth he had not expected, for Nayeli had not abandoned him out of betrayal, but out of blood, returning to a small band of her people, hiding from the soldiers and mercenaries that hunted them, children with hollow eyes, women worn thin, warriors broken yet unyielding, and Jonathan saw her there, standing tall with the stolen rifle in hand, not as a girl but as a leader, as if the desert itself had crowned her spirit. And when her eyes met his, there was no shock, no guilt, only a question. Would he stand as ally or enemy? And though the warriors around her raised their weapons, ready to cut him down, Nayeli lifted her hand and stayed them, for she had seen his choice at the fire, and in her silence he read the invitation to something greater than survival. Yet peace was not given easily, for before the night fell, soldiers rode into the canyon, trackers leading them, their torches blazing, rifles cracking, the sky filling with death. And in that chaos, Jonathan found himself fighting not for himself, but for those he had once thought strangers, firing stolen guns until his hands bled, shielding children with his body, his soul awakening to a truth that had long been buried. That freedom was not in coin or land or ownership, but in standing shoulder to shoulder with those who refused to kneel. And as bullets tore the canyon and screams echoed like thunder, Jonathan and Nayeli fought side by side, two souls bound by fire and dust, until the soldiers broke against the cliffs like waves against stone, retreating, leaving behind their dead and their shame. And when silence returned, Jonathan collapsed in the blood-soaked sand, certain his life was bleeding out with him. But Nayeli knelt beside him, pressing her hands against his wound, whispering words in her tongue that he could not understand, but that carried the weight of eternity. And in her eyes he saw not pity, not fear, but the fierce truth he had spent his whole life chasing, that freedom was not something you bought or sold, not something you held in your pocket like a crumpled dollar, but something you lived, something you gave, even unto death. And as dawn broke over the canyon, Jonathan Hale, once a ruined rancher with nothing, rose among the Apache not as master, not as savior, but as brother, his last dollar spent not on ownership, but on the spark of a revolution that would live long after his bones. And though the world beyond would never know their names, in that hidden canyon, freedom had been reborn. And if you have walked with me this far, if you've felt the dust on your tongue and the fire in your chest, then you know this story is not just about the past, but about us, about the choices we make when everything is stripped away. And if you believe that stories like this matter, stories of courage, defiance, and freedom, then don't just walk away, hit that subscribe button now, because the next tale may just be the one that changes how you see your own fight for freedom.